Hello. Good to see you today. This is your getting shaggier and shaggier algebra teacher, Mr. Brock, ready to bring you another fabulous lesson about quadratic formula. Hopefully you had some good practice with that last lesson. Starting to figure out there is no quadratic equation you can't solve, and now you're just heartbroken. You're in tears, but that's okay. Toilet paper is in short supply. There's still plenty of Kleenex, right? Plenty of Kleenex. So grab a box of tissues. Let's do some more quadratic equations with our quadratic formula. So, all right, here we go today. We are looking at lesson 17, applying the quadratic formula, part 1. Part 1, we're going to be working with this a while now, a few more. No solutions for you. No solutions for you. Here's an example of someone solving a quadratic equation that has no solution. All right, now if we got into that, when we were using the quadratic formula, we would end up with something that's like, well, that's not a real number. So that can't be a solution. We'd end up with something that square root of -2 or something, right? Let's look at this. X plus 3 squared plus 9 more equals 0. Okay, so here's what they did. They said, well, I'm going to move the 9 over here. So they subtracted 9 from this side, subtracted 9 from that side, and said, so x plus 3 squared equals -9. So the next step, they said, well, I'll just take the square root of both sides. So x plus 3 would equal either positive square root of -9 or the negative square root of -9. Study the example. At what point did you realize the equation had no solutions? And I'm not talking about when I told you it has no solutions. I'm talking about when you're looking at that, when you start saying, oh, yeah, that really doesn't have a solution. Was it at the end when I went plus or minus the square root of -9? The square root of -9. So that means there's a number that we would multiply by itself to get -9. Well, it can't be -3 because -3 times -3 is positive 9 because two negatives make a positive. Positive 3 times positive 3 is positive 9. If I said 3 times -3, that's not the same number times itself. That's two different numbers. So there's not a number we can multiply by itself, get -9. So by then, I hope for sure we knew that. But did you know it up here? When I said x plus 3 squared, that means in the parentheses, there's some number, right? And it would be x, 3 more than x, whatever x would be. So if I took x, add 3 more, whatever that number is, if I take it times itself, if I square it, it's going to equal -9. So maybe at that point you went, wait a minute, there's not a number I can multiply by itself to be -9. So right there, I know it's not true. Now, if you really had your Wheaties this morning and had your thinking cap on, you might have noticed it right here when I said that I take a number and I square it, and after I multiply it by itself, after I square it, I'm going to add 9 more, and I'm going to end up with 0. Maybe you went, wait a minute, I can't add 9 to a squared number and get 0, because that means this is going to have to be less than 0, and it's not going to be less than 0. If this is 0 in the if it's 0 in the parentheses and I square that, it's going to be 0, and then I'm going to add 9 to it. It's not going to be 0. If it's a negative number, -1, when I square that, it's going to be positive. So maybe you knew right there. And hopefully you did. We're going to get to that point where you start having that number sense, having that math sense to go, oh, well, there ain't no time wasting my time on this problem. Just wasting my time on this problem if I try to do anything, because that doesn't work. So that's what we're trying to do. To the point where you save yourself some time by knowing right away is like, well, that doesn't even have a solution. So explain how we know that 49 plus x squared equals 0 has no solution. Well, if we square x, right? If we square x, whatever x is, any number of x, it will be 0 or more, right? Can't be less than 0. Could be 0 if x was 0. But if it's a negative number and we multiply it by itself, it's going to be a positive number. So 0 is the smallest. And we're going to add it to 49. Add it to 49. Can't be 0. because it's got to be at least 0 or more, and we're going to add it to 49. There's no way that can be 0. So we're going to run the same problem we had up here. It's just the 49's in front instead of after like the 9 was. Same issue. So, all right, let's move on. We got a lot to cover today. For example, the potato and the pumpkin. Remember that one? Little kids, fairy tales, read it up. There was this potato and pumpkins. They were best friends. They walked to school every day until one day they... No, that was when the big buffet came through. No, I'm just kidding. There's no fairy tale that is the potato and the pumpkin. So if you're sitting there thinking you've gone crazy, well, that's maybe not the best way to test that. But anyway, answer each question without graphing. Maybe you're thinking, I've gone crazy, and they haven't found a good way to test that. Without graphing. So we're going to assume that we don't have any ability to graph this. Explain and show reasoning. So here's an equation. H of t equals negative 16t squared. Oh, we recognize that. That's usually the effect of gravity. Plus 80t plus 64 represents the height, which we've assumed because that was h of t, in feet. T seconds, t usually is time, so t seconds, after it's been launched. So write an equation that can be solved to find when the potato hits the ground. When is it going to hit the ground? Well, an equation for when it hits the ground will be negative 16t squared plus 80t. I don't have to change anything in the equation except for what it equals. What is the height when it hits the ground? Right? That's when it's mashed potatoes. So negative 16t squared plus 80t plus 64 equals 0. Now it says solve the equation. All right, well, we've got our quadratic formula. Let's write it up here. It is x equals, well, in this case, it's the height equals, or we're looking at the time. The time equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay? That was our quadratic formula. So, what is the a, b, and the c? The a is always the term that's with the squared term. What is with the squared? That's a. The other variable that's not squared, t in this case, could be x, whatever, this provides our b, and then the constant is c. C for constant, no variable. It's always plus 64. It's always a 64. A, B, C. All right, so negative b, negative 80. Okay, plus or minus the square root of b squared, 80 squared. What is 80 times 80? Well, 8 times 8 is 64. The 10 times 10 is 100. 10 times 10 is 100. 64 times 100 is 6,400. Okay, 6,400 minus 4, that 4 never changes, times a. What was a? Negative 16 times c, which is 64. Okay, and all of that is over 2 times a. A is negative 16, so 2 times negative 16 is negative 32. Woo! Boy, that looks like something. That's one thing with the quadratic formula. You can get into some big numbers if a, b, or c are large numbers. But it's always going to work. It's going to be easier than trying to factor that. You want to try to factor that? Factoring that could be a little difficult. But the quadratic formula, no problem. We got this. All right, so it's going to equal, we're still looking for the time. Let's simplify all of that. This doesn't simplify. Negative 80 is still negative 80. And minus 32 is still minus 32. But we need to simplify everything that's in there. So I'm going to grab our trusty calculator. And again, you have that link on Google Classroom. Link on Google Classroom that you can go to a online scientific calculator. Okay, so it wants to know 6,400 minus 4 times, and I'm going to put parentheses just like it shows on our problem, negative 16 parentheses 64. Okay, 6,400 minus 4 times negative 16 times 64, and that equals 10,496. So it's plus or minus the square root of 10,496. And we're going to continue down here into the next section because we're taking up a lot of space with the quadratic formula. All right, so it's negative 80 plus or minus, and the square root of 10,496. What's that? Quick, come on. What? I don't even have that memorized. That's not going to be a nice number anyway, I'm sure. Let's see, the square root of the answer, the 10,496. It is 102 point, we'll go 2 decimals, round it up to 5 because that's a 9 there. So 102.45 approximately, not exactly, but it'll be close enough to get what we need. Okay, so negative 80 plus or minus 102.45. So we're getting closer. So that means the answer is either negative 80 plus 102.45 divided by negative 32, or it's negative 80 minus 102.45 divided by 32. One or the other, right? One of those times. So let's do the first one. So let's clear that. Negative 80 plus 102.45. That equals 22.45. And then we'll divide that by negative 32. And we get negative 0.70. Well, we're talking about time. And what time did the potato hit? So we're not going to have a negative time. So we're throwing out that answer. It doesn't make sense for the problem. It is a solution to that equation, but it doesn't make sense because we're talking about time. So let's look at the other one. Negative 80 minus 102.45 equals, oops, I must have hit the wrong button. Let's try that again. Oh, I hit a minus instead of a decimal. Negative 80 minus 102.45. That was my problem right there. That equals negative 182.45. And then we're going to divide that by negative 32. And that answer is 5.7. 5.70 seconds. That is when this potato hit the ground. Boom, 5.7 seconds. All right, mashed potatoes. Write an equation that can be solved to find when the potato is 40 feet off the ground. That shouldn't be any harder than what we just did. We take the same equation, negative 16t squared plus 80t plus 64. But we don't want to set it equal to 0. We don't want to know when it's mashed potatoes. We want to know when it's 40 feet off the ground. So when is that height equal to 40? When's it 40? So we're going to do the same thing. And we're ready for the quadratic formula. Not quite. Quadratic formula will solve every quadratic equation, but the equation has to be ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Ours is not equal to 0. But we can make it equal to 0 real easily. Then we can use the quadratic formula. Subtract 40 from the right side. So we got negative 16t squared plus 80t plus 24 equals 0. Perfect. Now we are ready for the quadratic formula. Okay. So negative b. So negative 80 plus or minus the square root of b squared. 80 times 80 minus 4 times a. A is still negative 16. Make this longer. C is now 24 instead of 64. That's the only difference so far. And times 2a, still negative 32. So there is our quadratic formula for this problem. So let's simplify that again. All right, 6,400 minus 4 times negative 16 times 24 this time. And that is 7936. So we got negative 80 plus or minus the square root of 7936 divided by negative 32. You may be wondering, why is this going up when we're subtracting from it? Well, there's a negative in there. So when we multiply all that by a negative, we're going to subtract a negative number, which means we're adding it. So that's why it got bigger than 6,400. So the square root of 7936. Square root of our answer is 89.08. So negative 80 plus or minus 89.08 divided by negative 32. So that means there's two answers again. One is when negative 80 adds 89.08 and divides by negative 32. And the other is when negative 80 subtracts 89.08 and divides by negative 32. Right? That's the two answers, one or the other. So we can simplify those. Negative 80 plus 89.08 is just 908 divided by negative 32. Or the other one, let's do that. Negative 80 minus 89.08. It's negative 169.08 divided by negative 32. So let's go ahead and divide that since we got that in our calculator. Divided by negative 32. So that is 5.28. And this is going to be a positive divided by a negative. That's going to be a negative answer. So we don't want that one. So at 5.7, mashed potatoes. 5.28, potatoes still having a great time. Woo! Hadn't hit the ground, 40 feet off the ground, 5.28 seconds. Less than half a second later. But let's move on. All right. I'm moving on. I don't want to take too much time. We still got a few more pages, and I don't want this to last too much longer. So, let's get to the pumpkin. Pumpkin chunking. Here's the equation. GT equals 2 plus 23.7t minus 4.9t squared. But we need some practice with the quadratic formula. This models the height in meters of a pumpkin t seconds after it's launched. Is the pumpkin still in the air after 8 seconds later? Explain or show how we know. And at what value of t does the pumpkin hit the ground? Tell you what, I'm going to do problem number 2 first, because if I know when it hits the ground, that will answer the first one, won't it? If it hits the ground in 9 seconds, yes, it's still in the air 8 seconds later. But if it's before that, so let's do this one. 2 plus 23.7t minus 4.9t squared. When's it hit the ground? Right there. Right there. At 0 height. So, ABC. What is the A? It's, oh no. Rearranged equation. Rearranged equation. Remember, the A is always the coefficient of the squared variable. Our t squared is on this end. So, negative 4.9 is our A. This is our t, so it's B. And the constant is first. Constant, C. All right, so negative B, negative 23.7, plus or minus the square root of 23.7 squared, which we'll figure that out in the calculator, minus 4 times A, which is negative 4.9, times C, which is 2. All of that over 2 times A. A is negative 4.9, so 2 of those, negative 9.8. Okay, there's our quadratic formula. Let's do some simplifying. All right, so it's negative 23.7. And let's see, 23.7 squared. 23.7 squared is 561.69. And let's go ahead and subtract this from it. Minus, the same thing, 561.69 minus 4 times negative 4.9 times 2. Okay, so we got the same thing in there. So all of that is plus or minus the square root of 600.89. All of that divided by 9.8. What is the square root of 600.89? Well, let's see. Square root of our answer is 24.51. So we got negative 23.7 plus 24.51 over negative 9.8, or negative 23.7 minus 24.51 over negative 9.8. Okay, there's our two solutions. Let's do the math. Let's do the math. Negative 23.7 plus 24.51 equals 0.81 divided by negative 9.8. This is negative 0.08 seconds. Again, we're talking about seconds. We don't have negative seconds. So let's go to the other one, see what that answer is. Negative 23.7 minus 24.51 equals negative 48.21. And then I'm going to divide that by negative 9.8. And I'll get 4.92. We're going to round it up since that's a 9. It'll make the 1 round up second. So that's when the pumpkin hits the ground. 4.92 seconds. Is the pumpkin still in the air 8 seconds after it's launched? No. Explain. Right here. Because it hits the ground in 4.92 seconds. So we answered the second question, and it saved us a lot of work on the first question that we would have duplicated. So, oh, goody, 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 goody. I want to look at this. Oh, this is the summary. This is at the end of all the notes. If you ever want to look at the summary of it, that's there. So that's not a page we have to work, but it has a summary of the lesson. So this is our last page we're doing, and we're at about 20 minutes, so we're in pretty good shape. This won't take nearly as long as the quadratic formula. Find the missing expression in parentheses so that each pair of quadratic expressions is equivalent. We've done standard form. I want you to give me the two factors. And we've done, I give you the two factors. I want you to give me the standard form. Now I'm kind of giving you a combination. I'm giving you one factor and the standard form. What's the other factor? What would I multiply that to get this? So, if we have this factor, 7x plus 2, and we need another factor, this isn't big enough to write in, right? It's going to equal 7x squared plus 9x plus 2. So this first term right here in the standard comes from multiplying these two terms together. So what would we multiply 7x by to end up with 7x squared? 1x, right? 1 times 7, 7. X times x is x squared. So 1x. And since 1x, we don't have to put the 1. You can. It's not wrong to put the x, but 1x is the same as just x. And let's see. We have a plus 2. We need to multiply it by something to end up with plus 2. So obviously, we're multiplying it by 1. So the factors of this equation are 7x plus 2 and x plus 1. Hey, that wasn't so bad at all. And we can check that by knowing that this x multiplies by this number, and this number up here multiplies by this x. 7x times 1 is 7x. 2 times x is 2x. And 7x plus 2x is 9x. So that is the right equation. All right, we've got 2x. We need to end up with 4x squared. What would we multiply that by? Well, we need to multiply that by another 2x. Sure. Okay, we've got a 1. We need to end up with a minus 1. Well, 1 times minus 1 would give us what we need. So 2x plus 1, 2x minus 1. If we multiply those together, we get 2x. If we multiply those together, we get negative 2x. 2x minus 2x is 0x. That's why we don't have an x in the middle. We don't have that. We just have two terms, not the three terms like we had up there. Last one. Here we go. 1 plus x, and we need 3x squared. So what I'm going to... What? That's not how that works? This is rearranged. That is the same thing as x plus 1, right? You just put the x at the end instead of at the beginning. So we'll rewrite it so that we're not confused. It's the same as x plus 1. If that was 1 minus x, then we need to say it's negative x plus 1, because the minus would go with whichever followed it, minus x. So that we need to move the minus x to the front. So don't forget that. 1 minus x is not the same thing as x minus 1. Not the same thing. You got to keep the negative with whichever one it's with. X plus 1. So what do we need to multiply x by to get 3x squared? Well, obviously we need to multiply it by 3 and another x. So our other factor would be 3x. And we've got a plus 1, and we need a negative 8. So multiply 1 times negative 8. So the two factors would be 3x minus 8. That's our answer. That's what we're entering. Times x plus 1, which is what that was. Not so bad. Excuse me. All right, so you have some problems like this on your homework. Very similar type stuff. More quadratic formula practice so we can get good at that and be able to slay all those equations that attack us. All right, do work you can be proud of. See you next time.